Hello, I'm Jacob Tremolis. This is a presentation on the brain and exercise. This is for my exercise science seminar, senior seminar, and we are going to discuss exercise and induced neuroplasticity. So before we discuss the brain, I want to talk about certain myths regarding the brain. The first one is after childhood, the brain could not or would not change, and this is false. We are constantly changing our brain, and I'll tell you why. The second myth I want to talk about is we only use certain parts of the brain at any given time. A lot of times people think when you're asleep, your brain stops working or turns off. No, the brain is an organ that never stops working and is largely actually active in certain areas of the brain, such as the hippocampus, even during sleep. So we are finding that what we used to know about the brain is largely starting to become untrue or incomplete. And this is due to the recent technological advantages of the MMR, specifically the fMRI, where you can see even at the molecular level activity. We never used to have that. We always used to look at insensitive measurements such as autopsies or big brain scans where we didn't really get a sense of what actually was going on. So I believe it is essential to understand the brain because it's crucial for the understanding of human physiology and future disease prevention. What is neuroplasticity? Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life. So, why is this so huge? Well, if you look at certain brain disorders such as Parkinson's, where we see the dopaminergic receptors degrading within the basal ganglia of the substantia nigra, or you look at even bigger diseases such as Huntington's disease or Alzheimer's disease, where we see the hippocampus and the amygdala completely waste away. So, if recent come to light has become the phenomenon of neuroplasticity, which allows neurons in the brain to compensate for injury, disease, and adjust to activities in response to new situations or new changes in the environment. And we really found this interesting when we looked at research regarding strokes, and people, the recent therapies and treatments were just not working. And we started to look at them through fMRIs, and we noticed that these therapies actually were doing something. We just needed to prolong the treatment. So neuroplasticity is induced every time you learn a new skill or fact. And the ensuing research shows that it's largely because of our behaviors. It's because of our habits. So this idea of neuroplasticity, this phenomenon, not only can look at disease prevention, but even your everyday life, such as drug addiction. And we're really starting to understand that due to this phenomenon. So how does neuroplasticity actually work? How does the learning process for the brain do this? And the first step is chemicals. The transfer of neurochemicals trigger the brain functioning and will induce learning through the amounts or concentration of chemicals between neurons. So when you think of a neuron, you have a neuron-to-neuron communication within their synapses. They release neurotransmitters that allow this communication. So certain things we do, such as learning or any rewarding process, stimulates those areas. So these neurochemicals support short-term memory or the memory for a new motor skill. And I find this particularly interesting, especially for exercise science, because you think of the constant used term of muscle memory. And for years I used to think that was just made up or that really wasn't. But no, you actually can create muscle memory. You can learn that motor skill. Your brain actually adapts to learning that skill. And how does it do it is we found that the more you do something, it can actually alter the structure. So the brain can change the connections between neurons. And this of course would take a lot of time, but that's how you instill long-term memory. So therefore you can actually enlarge the structure of certain areas. And I think this is actually very appealing because I looked at research in London. Cab drivers, they have to learn this very vigorous test and learn every single street to be able to pass their license, to get their cab license and their permit. And researchers of London took these cab drivers after they were studying for this test, looked at their brain through an fMRI, and they saw enlarged areas in the brain for spatial memory. So that is where neuroplasticity actually comes to light. Continued, the more you induce the change of your brain, you change the function of your brain. So by altering the function, the more you use a brain region, the more excitable and easy to use that region becomes. So you can actually increase excitability within a brain. So if you go back to the cab drivers, they were studying and they were learning the spatial parts of this map and of London, the entire city. They actually changed themselves through learning. So with learning, we see a whole networks of brain activity shifting and changing. So in summary, our brains can change chemically. The more we induce chemicals for long periods of time, we can have structure change. And with structure change, we have function change. And this models the idea that our brain is plastic. No longer, when we thought that the brain was done developing before 25, that is what you had. No, your brain is incredibly plastic and is constantly changing throughout your life. So, with that being said, we know through habits, better or worse, can change your brain. Now, the big questions I really want to answer is, why do some kids fail in school? Why do we forget things as we age? Why don't people recover after brain damage completely? And this is where I discuss habitual habits for long extended periods of time. And we conclude the largest factor is our own behavior. The doses of behavior through practice, obviously quite high. There is also variability between person to person. I need to discuss there is genetic variability. Some people are more inclined for change. The brain seeks it based upon genes being turned on and off. But we must remember, just because you don't have the genes for things or they're not shown, you can change them. And another topic I would like to talk about is nutrigenetics or epigenetics. That realm of things shows you can actually consume food or certain chemicals, and the genes that once were not shown become turned on. Again, what also drives neuroplasticity is restful sleep. And I like the idea of sleep because when we think of brain and we think about brain injuries such as Alzheimer's disease, we're finding more preventative measures just by getting a night of sleep. And why? Because the brain doesn't have lymphatic vessels. It has blood vessels, and it also uses cerebral spinal fluid cerebral spinal fluid to actually flush out the toxins. And we know with Alzheimer's disease, there's a buildup of the amyloid plaque, beta amyloid plaque they always discuss it as. We are constantly producing this protein, beta amyloid. And we're finding within Alzheimer's disease, people that don't get enough sleep don't clear away the amyloid plaque. Therefore, when this protein's overproduced, we have a chemical change within the brain, and we're degrading areas such as the hippocampus. They're wasting away because of the overproduction of these chemicals, these proteins. Even more, like what I was suggesting, is diet supports neurogenesis, so the nutrigenomics, the epigenetics realm of things. And lastly, coming into what most people are interested in our major is exercise. Exercise can induce neuroplasticity. How? Well, there was a study within mice. It was called Exercise Enhances Learning in Hippocampal Neurogenesis in Aged Mice. So they took these young mice and they basically had them run on a wheel, and they found there was an actual morphological difference. here they display beforehand these little black dots. Hardly any. These are aged mice. They're wasting away their brain. But after doing this acute exercise for about a month or so, it was around a month to 3 months with these mice. Here, our brain neurons, it increased. So very remarkable. Just showing that exercise induces chemicals, neurotrophic factors, they're called, that actually works within the hippocampus, and it actually delays any sort of anti-aging or wasting away of the brain. So, lastly, what I want to conclude is the discussion of habits. Everything you do can affect you for the better or worse. And we know this based upon the phenomena of neuroplasticity. I'm Jacob Tremolos. Thank you.